All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle one of the biggest, most confusing questions out there today. How in the world can the wealthiest nation on Earth have so much poverty? It's a huge paradox, and we're going to break down exactly how it works. So let's start with a single number that really tells you a lot: 63%. Get this, that's how many American workers say they could not cover a $500 emergency. I mean, we're not talking about a huge disaster here. We're talking about a flat tire or a surprise trip to the doctor. It's this feeling of being constantly on the edge that's just normal for most people. And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. You have this idea of America, the global superpower, the land of opportunity. And then there's the reality for millions of people who are just struggling to keep their heads above water. So, what gives? Here's our game plan for today. We'll start by laying out the paradox itself. Then, we'll look at the systemic issues, what I'm calling the rungs on the ladder. We'll ask if we're even measuring this whole thing correctly, then dive into the psychology of it all, the massive debt it causes, and finally, talk about a totally different way to look at the problem. Okay, so first up, that central contradiction. A country with unbelievable wealth living side by side with really widespread hardship. And wow, these numbers lay it out perfectly. On one hand, the United States has the biggest GDP in the world, period. By that measure, it's the richest country. But at the exact same time, you've got 37.9 million people, that's almost 12% of the population, officially living in poverty. How can both of those things be true? Well, this situation didn't just happen by accident. It's actually baked into the structure of the economy. So let's take a look at those systemic problems, starting with just how far apart the rungs on the economic ladder have gotten. A huge piece of the puzzle is this massive gap between what it actually costs to live and what jobs pay. According to MIT, a living wage for a family of four, just the basics, is more than $24 an hour. And the federal minimum wage, it's been stuck at $7.25 for over a decade. Think about that. A family would need way more than 2 full-time minimum wage jobs just to scrape by. And this chart shows you exactly what that leads to. The top 10% of earners in America make more than 13 times what the bottom 10% make. When the gap is that huge, the rungs on that ladder get so far apart that it becomes almost impossible for people to climb up. And this is wild. Sometimes the system itself actually holds people back. It's called the poverty trap. So imagine you work hard and you get a small raise. That sounds great, right? But that little bit of extra money could push you just over the income limit for things you absolutely need, like food stamps or health insurance. So you actually end up worse off financially for making more money. It creates a system where it literally doesn't pay to get ahead. But here's a really important question. What if the problem is even bigger than the official numbers tell us? This brings us to our next point. Are we even using the right ruler to measure poverty in the first place? So the way the U.S. government officially measures poverty was created back in the 1960s. The whole idea was based on how much a basic food budget cost back then, and then they just multiplied it by 3. And what's just unbelievable is that today we're still using that same basic formula. As you can imagine, this old ruler has some major flaws. For one, it uses pre-tax income, not the money you actually take home. It doesn't really factor in huge modern costs like childcare or healthcare, and it totally ignores the fact that living in, say, San Francisco costs way more than living in rural Alabama. A lot of experts argue this means we are seriously undercounting how many people are actually struggling. So beyond the system and the numbers, there's this huge psychological piece to the puzzle. All of this constant financial pressure creates something researchers call a scarcity mindset. Now, this scarcity feeling doesn't just hit people in poverty. It can affect almost anyone, often because of something called lifestyle creep. You know what this is? You get a little raise, so you start eating out a little more, or you add a new streaming service. And before you know it, your spending has risen right alongside your income, and you feel just as broke as you did before. And this quote just captures the feeling perfectly. Being stuck in that scarcity mindset, always worrying about the next bill, it's exhausting. It can just drain the joy out of life because you're constantly on high alert for a financial threat, even if you're technically doing okay. And I want you to really let this sink in. This is not just a low-income issue, not at all. More than half of Americans who make over $100,000 a year say that they are living paycheck to paycheck. That just shows you how deep this feeling of financial instability runs in America today. So what happens when wages aren't keeping up, costs are soaring, and everybody feels squeezed? Well, people turn to credit cards.
And that has led us straight into a massive trillion-dollar debt trap.
Just look at this number. For the very first time in history, total credit card debt in the US has passed $1 trillion. That is an absolutely staggering amount of financial weight on the shoulders of American families.
And here is why that debt is so incredibly dangerous. The average interest rate on a credit card is over 20%, and for those retail store cards, you're looking at almost 30%. But here's the kicker. Most people aren't racking up this debt on shopping sprees. The number one reason is for emergency expenses, that same car repair or medical bill we talked about. And at these interest rates, a small problem can spiral into a huge crisis, fast.
Okay, so given everything we've talked about, how do we even begin to solve this? That brings us to our last section, and it calls for a really big shift in how we look at this whole thing. What if we stopped trying to fix the people and started trying to fix the game itself? This is the fundamental question. For so long, the conversation about poverty has been all about personal choice, work harder, make better decisions. But what if the problem isn't that people are playing the game wrong? What if the game itself is set up to fail? I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. Imagine a game of musical chairs. You've got 10 people, but you only put out 8 chairs. When that music stops, what happens? 2 people are guaranteed to lose. It doesn't matter how fast they are, how smart they are, or how hard they try. The structure of the game itself ensures that someone will be left without a chair. The argument here is that the American economy has become that game of musical chairs. Now, this idea of changing the game isn't just some fantasy. We have proof that it works. Policies like Social Security and Medicare drastically cut poverty among senior citizens. They proved that big systemic changes can make a huge difference. Other ideas that follow this same logic are things like a universal basic income, raising the minimum wage to a real living wage, or expanding programs like the child tax credit. And so that leaves us with this one final, really important question. If the system is a game with not enough chairs for everyone, does it make sense to just keep telling people they need to run faster, or does it make more sense to focus on just adding more chairs? That's the choice at the very heart of solving this paradox.